Pope Francis appointed Manila Archbishop Cardinal Luis Tagle as the new prefect of the congregation.
Pope Francis has long been known for his unconventional approach to leadership, often choosing to align himself with individuals who share his progressive vision for the Catholic Church. Among those who have captured his attention is a lesser-known but highly influential figure, someone whose impact could redefine the Church's direction for years to come. One name that has consistently emerged in discussions about the Church's evolving leadership is Cardinal Luis Tagle. His close connection with Pope Francis has sparked both admiration and speculation, with some seeing their partnership as a catalyst for change and others questioning the extent of their influence on the Church's future. During a highly anticipated gathering in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, Pope Francis made a remarkable statement regarding Cardinal Tagle. Addressing the crowd at the historic Cathedral Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, the Pope spoke in a way that suggested he was ready to unveil something long speculated about but never officially addressed. The decision to openly discuss Cardinal Tagle at this moment raised many questions. Why now? What led Pope Francis to shed light on this relationship at this particular time? And perhaps most importantly, how will this revelation affect the Church's position on the global stage? Today, we are diving deep into the significance of Pope Francis' latest remarks, exploring the profound connection between him and Cardinal Tagle, and uncovering the potential implications of their partnership. The relationship between Pope Francis and Cardinal Luis Tagle is not merely a matter of formal hierarchy within the Church, it is one of shared ideals, mutual respect, and a collective vision for the future. Both men have emphasized a church that prioritizes humility, service, and inclusivity over rigid traditions and bureaucratic control. From the very beginning of his papacy, Pope Francis made it clear that he envisioned a church that placed the needs of the poor at its center. This mission closely aligned with the work Cardinal Tagle had already been doing in Manila, where he had become widely known for his ability to connect with ordinary people, speak their language, and understand their struggles. Unlike many high-ranking members of the clergy who maintain a certain level of formality and detachment, Tagle is recognized for his genuine warmth and accessibility. His kindness, his deep commitment to charitable work, and his ability to inspire have made him a well-respected figure, not just within the Philippines but across the world. Pope Francis, heavily influenced by this approach, believes in a model of leadership where clergy are not just religious figures delivering sermons, but compassionate individuals engaging with people on a deeply personal level. Their shared ideology, one that embraces reform, modernization, and engagement with the marginalized, has made their partnership a powerful force within the Church. This dynamic became even more evident when, in 2019, Pope Francis appointed Cardinal Tagle as the prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, a role that carries enormous influence over missionary activities worldwide. Often referred to as the Red Pope, this position oversees Catholic outreach efforts across various continents, including Asia, Africa, and Latin America, regions that are key to the future of the Church. By entrusting Tagle with this responsibility, Pope Francis sent a clear message. The future of Catholicism lies in its ability to adapt, embrace diverse cultures, and remain relevant in an ever-changing world. However, their relationship is not just about organizational decisions and administrative roles. At its core, it reflects a deeper belief in prioritizing compassion over strict doctrine, fostering open dialogue rather than division, and taking action rather than relying solely on words. Both leaders have faced resistance from more traditional factions within the Church, who view their progressive stance as a departure from established customs. Yet, their unwavering commitment to a church of service rather than hierarchy has only strengthened their resolve. One of the defining moments in Cardinal Tagle's journey was his response to the devastating Typhoon Haiyan in 2013. In the aftermath of the disaster, he worked tirelessly to provide aid, comfort, and spiritual support to those affected. His actions during this crisis not only reinforced his reputation as a leader of compassion, but also aligned perfectly with Pope Francis' vision of a church that actively serves those in need. His humility and hands-on approach mirrored the very principles Pope Francis has championed since the start of his tenure, making Tagle a natural extension of the Pope's ideals. Beyond his charitable work, Cardinal Tagle is also known for his theological insights and ability to make complex religious teachings accessible to ordinary people. His approach to evangelization is inclusive, embracing diverse perspectives rather than rigid interpretations. This has made him a respected figure among those who see the Church as a space for all, rather than a rigid institution with strict boundaries. Recently, Pope Francis has made comments that have reignited discussions about Cardinal Tagle's potential future within the Vatican. While the Pope has not explicitly outlined long-term plans for Tagle, many believe that his growing prominence is no accident. His rise from the streets of Manila to the highest corridors of the Vatican is not just a personal achievement, it may also signal a broader shift within the Church. Cardinal Tagle's journey is one of purpose and dedication. Born in 1957 in the Philippines, he grew up in an environment that deeply valued faith, community, and service to others. From a young age, he displayed both intellectual brilliance and an unwavering commitment to helping the less fortunate. His decision to pursue a life in theology was not merely an academic choice, but a calling that would shape his entire life. His leadership truly took form when he was appointed as the Archbishop of Manila in 2011. Almost immediately, he distinguished himself from past leaders by rejecting material excess and prioritizing the well-being of the people. At a time when the Church was grappling with internal challenges, Tagle emerged as a reformist who sought to bring sincerity and justice back into religious leadership. His sermons resonated with millions, touching on real-life struggles and offering messages of hope and unity. His ability to inspire and connect with people on such a deep level led many to compare him to Pope Francis himself, earning him the nickname Asia's Francis. His popularity has only grown over the years, and his leadership style continues to embody the ideals of humility, service, and inclusivity. As Pope Francis continues to guide the Church through an era of change, Cardinal Tagle's role in this transformation cannot be overlooked. His rise within the Vatican, his commitment to reform, and his alignment with Pope Francis' vision all suggest that his influence will only continue to grow. What does this mean for the Church moving forward? Could Cardinal Tagle's leadership mark the beginning of a new chapter in Catholic history? One thing is certain: his journey, his work, and his partnership with Pope Francis will continue to shape the Church's path for years to come. Cardinal Luis Tagle's rise to international prominence was not a sudden or random occurrence. It was a gradual yet powerful ascension, marked by a series of key appointments that solidified his growing influence within the Vatican. As his responsibilities expanded, so too did his recognition as a leader with a potential to shape the Church's future. Among the most defining moments in his rise was his tenure as the president of Caritas Internationales, a global Catholic charity network operating across 165 countries. In this role, Tagle spearheaded various humanitarian efforts, working to combat poverty, hunger, and environmental issues on a large scale. His ability to bridge cultural gaps and foster dialogue between diverse communities made him a key figure in the Church's mission to engage with the modern world. Tagle's exceptional skill in uniting different perspectives within the Church led to an even more prestigious appointment in 2019. Pope Francis selected him as the prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, a position that placed him at the very core of the Vatican's mission to spread the gospel globally. This appointment was more than just a title, it signified a turning point, thrusting him into one of the Church's most influential roles. As the head of the Vatican's evangelization efforts, Tagle became responsible for overseeing Catholic missions in non-Western regions, including Asia and Africa, areas that are crucial to the future growth of the Church. Unlike many traditional leaders, he embraced cultural diversity, recognizing that different communities experience faith in unique ways. His approach emphasized adaptation rather than rigid conformity, making evangelization efforts more effective and relatable in rapidly evolving societies. But what does this widespread popularity and growing responsibility truly mean? The answer lies in Cardinal Tagle's ability to mobilize people. His diplomatic finesse, theological depth, and genuine charisma have positioned him as a leader capable of navigating the Church through complex modern challenges. His ability to communicate effectively, inspire action, and balance tradition with progress has led many to wonder, could he be on track for an even greater role in the Vatican? Could his influence continue to expand? Or is it possible that he might even be considered a future candidate for the papacy? And if so, what kind of church would emerge under his leadership? One of the defining elements of the Catholic Church under Pope Francis has been its shift in focus toward those who exist on the margins of society. Often referred to as the Church for the Poor, this vision places a strong emphasis on social justice, compassion, and advocacy for the vulnerable. Cardinal Tagle has played a crucial role in advancing this mission, standing alongside Pope Francis in calling for a more inclusive and service-oriented church. Their combined leadership is deeply rooted in the belief that faith should not be confined within grand cathedrals or exclusive theological debates. It should be lived out in the streets, among those who need it most. This philosophy is reflected in Pope Francis' broader vision of the Church as a sanctuary for the outcasts, a place where the forgotten and marginalized can find hope. As the president of Caritas Internationalis, Cardinal Tagle has been at the forefront of this mission, launching campaigns to combat world hunger, provide shelter to refugees, and address pressing global issues such as climate change. Beyond just words, his ability to negotiate resources, encourage action, and build partnerships has made him a critical player in the Church's charitable outreach. Listening has been a cornerstone of Tagle's leadership style. He frequently emphasizes that to truly serve others, one must first be willing to hear their stories, understand their struggles, and respond with genuine love. "If you listen, you open yourself to love," he once said. "And those who love will never grow tired of listening." This principle stands in stark contrast to traditional models of top-down authority within the Church. Instead of commanding from above, Tagle believes in engaging in meaningful dialogue, particularly with those who have been historically overlooked. However, this shift toward prioritizing the marginalized has not come without criticism. Some more traditional factions within the Church argue that focusing too much on social issues could overshadow Catholic doctrine. They claim that by aligning with modern humanitarian causes, Pope Francis and his allies risk diluting the theological foundations of the faith. Detractors have even accused the Pope and his supporters of moving toward political correctness rather than preserving the traditional values of the Church. Despite these criticisms, Pope Francis and Cardinal Tagle have remained steadfast in their approach. They recognize that the Church must remain relevant in today's world, addressing contemporary issues while staying true to its core mission of love and service. If the Church turns a blind eye to the struggles of the poor, the displaced, and the suffering, they argue, it risks becoming disconnected from the very people it seeks to serve. Beyond his humanitarian efforts, Tagle has also played a crucial role in advancing interfaith dialogue. In an increasingly divided world, fostering positive relationships between different religious communities is more important than ever. By engaging in conversations with leaders of other faiths, he has sought to promote understanding, tolerance, and unity values that are essential in today's global landscape. This dedication to building bridges rather than walls aligns perfectly with Pope Francis' overarching message, a call for inclusivity, compassion, and a renewed commitment to human dignity. Through the combined efforts of Pope Francis and Cardinal Tagle, the Catholic Church is undergoing a transformation, one that seeks to bring faith into direct contact with everyday struggles. This modern approach to Catholicism is unfolding before our eyes, shifting the Church's mission from a rigid institution to a more dynamic force for good. But could this emphasis on serving the marginalized signal a deeper change in how the Church understands its purpose in an evolving world? Behind the solemn expressions of faith and the outward appearance of unity, the Vatican has long been a place where power dynamics are carefully balanced. The Roman Catholic Church, an institution steeped in centuries of tradition, has always navigated an intricate web of authority and influence. Even as Pope Francis and Cardinal Tagle push for a more compassionate and engaged church, there are underlying tensions between those who embrace change and those who remain deeply committed to tradition. The question remains, will the Church's new direction endure, or will internal power struggles shape its path in unexpected ways? The internal dynamics of the Catholic Church have long been shaped by ideological battles, with reformists and traditionalists constantly engaged in an unspoken struggle over the direction of the faith. Within this complex landscape, figures like Pope Francis and Cardinal Luis Tagle have emerged as leading voices for change, advocating for a church that is more inclusive, decentralized, and engaged with contemporary global issues. Their vision, however, has not been universally accepted. Many within the more conservative factions of the Church view their efforts with skepticism, if not outright opposition, leading to a quiet but persistent conflict over the future of Catholicism. Pope Francis, throughout his papacy, has been unwavering in his commitment to reform. He has openly criticized the dangers of clericalism, the excessive power and privilege given to the clergy, and has called for a church that places greater emphasis on service rather than hierarchy. He has also taken bold stances on issues that extend beyond the religious sphere, speaking candidly on matters such as migration, economic fairness, and climate change. His warnings about environmental destruction have been particularly striking. In a direct and urgent message, he cautioned that if real action is not taken, the Earth could reach a point where it becomes uninhabitable for future generations. Despite these efforts, significant resistance remains. Some of the most vocal critics of Pope Francis' leadership come from within the Vatican itself, particularly from ultra-conservative groups who believe that these reforms mark a departure from traditional Catholic teachings. They argue that shifting the Church's focus toward modern social issues risks compromising its theological foundations. Among the more controversial changes has been the increased transparency within the Vatican's financial institutions, a move that has stirred considerable tension among those with vested interests in maintaining the old systems. Cardinal Tagle has found himself at the center of these debates, representing the very essence of Pope Francis' reformist vision. His leadership style, marked by humility, dialogue, and a focus on participation, stands in contrast to the more rigid and hierarchical traditions of Catholic governance. However, his rapid ascent within the Vatican has not come without challenges. While he is widely admired for his commitment to service and his ability to engage with diverse communities, some see his rise as a potential threat to long-standing structures of power. His increasing influence has led to speculation about what role he may play in shaping the Church's future. One of the most contentious areas in this ongoing struggle is financial oversight. Pope Francis has made it clear that he intends to root out corruption and mismanagement within the Vatican's financial institutions. These efforts have been met with fierce resistance, as many powerful figures within the Church have a strong interest in keeping certain financial dealings shielded from scrutiny. As a key figure in managing charitable operations, Cardinal Tagle has aligned himself with the push for greater transparency, advocating for stricter regulations and clearer financial disclosures. This, however, has placed him at odds with individuals and groups who prefer to maintain the status quo. The question of succession further complicates these power dynamics. While Pope Francis has not explicitly named a preferred successor, the increasing visibility of Cardinal Tagle has led many to wonder whether he could be a leading contender for the role in the future. Should the Church continue along its current reformist path, Tagle's rise could represent a continuation of Pope Francis' vision. However, traditionalists are determined to ensure that the next leader aligns more closely with their values, setting the stage for an intense behind-the-scenes struggle over the Church's future direction. These ideological battles are not confined to the Vatican alone. Across the world, The tension between reform and tradition plays out in dioceses and communities, influencing how local church leaders navigate modern challenges. In many regions, traditionalist elements remain strong, advocating for a return to stricter interpretations of Catholic doctrine. At the same time, the increasing influence of reformist leaders highlights a growing divide between unity and the evolving nature of Catholicism in the 21st century. How these conflicts unfold will determine the Church's ability to remain relevant in a rapidly changing world. At the heart of these transitions stands Cardinal Luis Tagle, a leader whose journey within the Catholic Church is still unfolding. Despite the many challenges he faces, he has already left an indelible mark on modern Catholicism. He is seen by many as a champion of social justice, a defender of human dignity, and an advocate for those who have been marginalized. His work in supporting immigrants, fighting poverty, and addressing global inequalities has made him a symbol of hope for progressive Catholics worldwide. However, his growing influence has not come without obstacles. The Catholic Church, as an institution, is deeply rooted in centuries of tradition, and any attempt to introduce change inevitably encounters resistance. Tagle's leadership has been characterized by a careful balancing act pushing for reform while navigating the complex internal politics of the Church. His ability to connect with people from all walks of life has been one of his greatest strengths. Whether delivering a sermon to thousands in Manila or representing the Vatican on the world stage, he has consistently demonstrated a humility and warmth that resonates with the faithful. Many within the Church long for a leadership style that reflects the values Tagle embodies, a model that prioritizes personal connection and spiritual guidance over bureaucracy and rigid institutional structures. He has positioned himself as a figure who believes in a living, breathing faith, one that is engaged with the struggles of everyday people rather than detached from them. This approach has led some to describe him as a revolutionary within the modern Catholic Church, someone who seeks to bring faith back to its roots in service and compassion. However, the road ahead is uncertain. The Catholic Church is facing a period of significant transformation, and the tensions between reformists and traditionalists show no signs of easing. While the influence of the Church has declined in certain parts of the world, particularly in Europe and North America, its presence continues to grow in other regions. In places like Asia and Africa, where faith remains a central part of daily life, Catholicism is flourishing. As these shifts continue, the Church's future leadership will need to reflect the realities of its diverse and evolving global community. Cardinal Tagle stands at a crossroads, embodying both the hopes of those who seek a more compassionate and inclusive Church and the challenges of leading an institution steeped in centuries of tradition. As the Church navigates the complexities of the modern world, figures like Tagle will play a crucial role in shaping its direction. Whether he becomes an even greater force within the Vatican or continues his work in charitable and evangelization efforts, one thing is certain: his impact on the Catholic Church is far from over. The shifting demographics of the Catholic Church present both remarkable opportunities and formidable challenges. As the Church continues to grow in regions such as Asia and Africa, it gains a more diverse and dynamic congregation. However, this same diversity also complicates the mission of providing spiritual leadership that resonates across vastly different cultural and societal landscapes. Leading such a heterogeneous body requires sensitivity, adaptability, and a deep understanding of the distinct needs of various communities. Cardinal Luis Tagle, as a non-Western leader, is uniquely positioned to bridge these cultural gaps. His upbringing in the Philippines and extensive experience working with international communities have made him highly attuned to the complexities of faith in non-Western societies. His approach emphasizes the balance between tradition and modernity, upholding the foundational values of the Church while also embracing the evolving realities of the contemporary world. One of the defining aspects of Tagle's leadership has been his involvement in critical global issues, such as interfaith dialogue and environmental advocacy. His presence at international summits, including the Paris Conference on Climate Change, demonstrated his commitment to justice, equity, and global responsibility. He has consistently spoken about the moral obligation to care for the planet, emphasizing that the principles of fairness must guide humanity's response to climate change. However, not all members of the Catholic hierarchy have welcomed this shift. Traditionalists within the Church have expressed concern that figures like Tagle are diverting attention away from theological matters in favor of social activism. To them, his engagement with topics such as climate change and migration represents a departure from the core mission of the Church. This internal debate is emblematic of the larger ideological tensions shaping the Catholic Church in the modern era. The question remains, will Tagle be able to balance these competing expectations, ensuring that the Church remains both spiritually grounded and socially relevant? The answer to this question will ultimately define his legacy. As the Catholic Church continues to evolve, the issue of leadership becomes increasingly significant. The reforms initiated under Pope Francis will need to be carried forward by future leaders, ensuring that the progress made is not undone. Cardinal Tagle's growing influence within the Vatican and his unwavering loyalty to Pope Francis position him as one of the key figures who could shape the direction of the Church in the coming years. But even if his vision for a more inclusive and service-oriented Church is compelling, will it find a strong enough following among the global Catholic population, which remains diverse and at times deeply divided? There has been much discussion about the imprint Tagle is leaving on the Church, though his full impact is still unfolding. He operates within an institution that must balance centuries-old traditions with the demands of a rapidly changing world. The challenges before him are immense. He must navigate a space where long-standing conventions meet new expectations for reform and inclusivity. His ability to inspire hope, unite people across cultures, and provide steady guidance will determine whether he emerges as a defining leader of the new Catholic Church. Can his leadership usher in a new era, one of renewal, compassion, and revitalization? Amid discussions about Pope Francis' eventual successor, several names have emerged as strong contenders for the papacy. Among them, two figures stand out for their contrasting visions: Cardinal Luis Tagle and Cardinal Pietro Parolin. Both men represent different ideological paths for the future of the Church, and their perceived rivalry encapsulates the broader debate about whether Catholicism should continue its progressive trajectory or return to a more traditionalist framework. Cardinal Pietro Parolin currently serves as the Vatican's Secretary of State, making him one of the most powerful figures within the Holy See. In addition to his role as a cardinal, he has a wealth of diplomatic experience, having spent years shaping the Vatican's global policies and managing its intricate web of international relations. Unlike Tagle, whose leadership has been defined by his pastoral nature and progressive ideals, Parolin is widely regarded as a traditionalist who adheres to the more classical structures of Catholic governance. Hailing from Italy, Parolin represents the historical core of the Catholic Church. He has earned respect among conservative factions due to his work in maintaining the Church's influence within the ever-changing global landscape. Where Tagle is seen as a leader for the marginalized, Parolin is viewed as a figure deeply embedded within the Vatican's hierarchical systems, possessing a strategic mind capable of handling the Church's most complex political and diplomatic affairs. One of Parolin's greatest strengths lies in his ability to mediate internal Church conflicts. Since assuming his role, he has worked tirelessly to maintain balance between opposing factions, often choosing a centrist approach rather than taking drastic positions. His skill in navigating the internal power dynamics of the Vatican has made him a favorite among those who prefer continuity and gradual adjustments over sweeping reform. However, critics argue that Parolin's moderate stance and diplomatic nature may not be enough to address the pressing challenges facing the Church today. In an era of rapid transformation, where Catholicism must find ways to remain relevant in an increasingly secular world, some believe that more decisive leadership is needed, leadership that is willing to embrace change and reimagine the Church's role in society. This is where the contrast between him and Tagle becomes most apparent. While Tagle embodies a forward-thinking approach that prioritizes inclusion, community engagement, and social justice, Parolin represents a more traditionalist outlook, emphasizing institutional stability and doctrinal preservation. Their differing perspectives raise fundamental questions about the Church's future. Will the next pope be a reformer who continues the path laid out by Pope Francis? Or will the Church opt for a leader who reinforces historical structures and policies? As the Church navigates the challenges of the modern era, the ideological divide between reformists and traditionalists will play a crucial role in shaping its future. Many Catholics, particularly in the growing communities of Asia and Africa, are drawn to leaders like Tagle, who offer a more personal, compassionate, and service-driven vision of faith. Others, especially within Europe and the Vatican itself, may favor a figure like Parolin, who represents the structured, diplomatic traditions that have defined the Church for centuries. Ultimately, the decision on who will lead the Church in the future will reflect the priorities of the broader Catholic community. Will the focus remain on inclusivity and modernization, or will the Church revert to a more hierarchical and traditional structure? For now, Cardinal Tagle continues to leave his mark, building bridges between cultures, advocating for social justice, and pushing for a faith that speaks to the realities of contemporary life. Whether or not he ascends to the highest office of the Church, his influence is undeniable. The legacy he is crafting, one of humility, engagement, and reform, will shape the direction of Catholicism for years to come. Cardinal Pietro Parolin's prominence within the Vatican is not just a testament to his individual influence. It also reflects the enduring dominance of Italian clergy within the Church's highest administrative structures. For centuries, the papacy has been overwhelmingly led by European, and more specifically, Italian pontiffs. This deep-rooted tradition has shaped the governance of the Catholic Church, reinforcing the influence of the Vatican's internal hierarchy. The election of Pope Francis in 2013 was a significant departure from this historical pattern. As the first pope from Latin America, his appointment signaled a move toward a more globalized Church, one that recognized the growing influence of Catholic communities outside of Europe. However, the increasing visibility of Cardinal Parolin in Vatican affairs suggests that there may be a shift back toward the traditional power centers of the Church. If Parolin emerges as a frontrunner in the race for the papacy, it could indicate a return to familiar structures, an era in which the Vatican's leadership remains centered in Europe, rather than continuing the trajectory of diversification seen in recent years. This dynamic adds another layer of complexity to the ongoing debate over Pope Francis' eventual successor. The contest is no longer just about individual leadership styles or theological leanings. It is a reflection of a larger struggle between continuity and evolution within the Catholic Church. Should the next pope be a figure who continues to modernize the Church, bringing it into closer contact with ordinary people and addressing contemporary social issues? Or should the Church reaffirm its deep-rooted traditions, ensuring that leadership remains firmly within the established clerical hierarchy? The answer to this question will shape the direction of Catholicism for decades to come. As speculation about Pope Francis' successor continues to circulate in media and religious circles, the perceived rivalry between Cardinal Luis Tagle and Cardinal Pietro Parolin has taken center stage. This competition is more than just a personal contest. It represents the struggles and growing divisions that the Church faces in adapting to the modern world. Both men are deeply devoted to the mission of the Church, yet their approaches to leadership are strikingly different. Cardinal Tagle, with his deep connection to grassroots movements, is seen as a leader of the people. His emphasis on compassion, dialogue, and active engagement with marginalized communities has won him admiration among those who believe that the Church must continue evolving to remain relevant. He represents a future where Catholicism is more inclusive, focused on service, and less bound by rigid institutional traditions. On the other hand, Cardinal Parolin embodies the diplomatic and administrative expertise that has historically defined Vatican leadership. As the Vatican's Secretary of State, He has played a key role in shaping the Church's geopolitical influence, maintaining relationships with governments and religious organizations worldwide. He is regarded as a stabilizing force, someone who understands the complexities of governing an institution as vast and historically entrenched as the Catholic Church. To many within the Vatican bureaucracy, Parolin is the candidate who would ensure continuity, preserving the structural integrity of the Church while carefully navigating its position in an increasingly complex world. The direction the Church chooses to take in the coming years will be determined by which vision prevails. Will the next pope be a leader who prioritizes connection with the faithful and direct engagement with contemporary issues, as Tagle represents? Or will the Church opt for a leader who reinforces its traditional governance structures and diplomatic presence, as seen in Parolin? This debate is not just taking place within the walls of the Vatican. It extends to Catholic communities around the world. Many believers, particularly in non-Western regions where Catholicism is growing rapidly, are calling for a pope who understands their struggles and represents their perspectives. Others, particularly in Europe and within the established Vatican hierarchy, are more inclined toward a leader who ensures the continuity of long-standing traditions. The choice of the next pope will not only define the Church's leadership, but also its ability to navigate an increasingly polarized and complex global landscape. Will the Catholic Church continue along the path of transformation and outreach, or will it consolidate its power within the structures that have governed it for centuries? As the discussion about the future of the papacy intensifies, one question remains at the forefront. Could Cardinal Luis Tagle be the next pope? Would his vision for a church rooted in service, humility, and inclusivity be embraced by the Vatican leadership? Or is it more likely that the papacy will return to its traditional roots, with Cardinal Pietro Parolin emerging as the preferred successor? The outcome of this decision will shape the Catholic Church for generations. What do you think? Who is most likely to ascend to the papal throne, and what kind of leadership does the Church need in today's world? Let us know your thoughts. The Catholic Church stands at a critical juncture, one where its future direction is being debated not only within the Vatican, but also among the millions of faithful worldwide. The question of who will succeed Pope Francis is not simply about choosing a new leader, it is about determining the vision and mission that the Church will embrace for decades to come. The two most talked about contenders for the papacy, Cardinal Luis Tagle and Cardinal Pietro Parolin, represent two distinct paths. One focused on modernization and deeper engagement with people, and the other rooted in preserving the Church's historical governance and traditional structures. This unfolding debate is more than a mere power struggle. It symbolizes the broader ideological divide that has been growing within the Church. As the Catholic world watches closely, the battle between tradition and reform has become the defining question of its time. Since assuming the papacy in 2013, Pope Francis has redefined what it means to be a modern Catholic leader. His emphasis on social justice, care for the poor, climate action, and interfaith dialogue has reshaped the Church's priorities. More than just words, his actions such as opening up discussions about migration, economic inequality, and Vatican transparency have earned him both praise and criticism. His leadership has also reflected a shift in where power resides within the Catholic Church. Historically, the Vatican and European leaders have played the dominant role in defining doctrine and policy. However, under Pope Francis, the focus has moved toward non-Western regions, where Catholicism continues to grow at an unprecedented rate. Today, places like Asia, Africa, and Latin America are home to the most vibrant Catholic communities, while in Europe and North America, attendance at Mass has steadily declined. This shift in focus is why figures like Cardinal Luis Tagle have risen in prominence. As a leader from the Philippines, one of the largest Catholic countries in the world, Tagle represents the Church's future in non-Western societies. His leadership style emphasizes humility, inclusivity, and service to the poor, echoing the very principles that Pope Francis has championed. Cardinal Luis Tagle's rapid ascent in the Vatican has been nothing short of remarkable. From his work in Manila as Archbishop, where he was beloved for his ability to connect with ordinary people, to his appointment as prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, Tagle has steadily become one of the most visible faces of the Catholic Church. Many view Tagle as a natural successor to Pope Francis. His approach is deeply pastoral, meaning he focuses on engaging directly with communities and fostering an inclusive church that welcomes all people. His work in Caritas Internationales, where he oversaw major humanitarian efforts, further cemented his reputation as a leader dedicated to charity, justice, and advocacy for the marginalized. But will his vision for the Church be embraced by the Vatican's governing body? That remains one of the most pressing questions in the ongoing debate about the next pope. On the other side of this debate stands Cardinal Pietro Parolin, a vastly different kind of leader. As the Vatican's Secretary of State, he has been at the center of the Church's diplomatic and political affairs, representing the Vatican in negotiations with world leaders and maintaining its global influence. Parolin is known for being a pragmatic and strategic thinker, someone who operates behind the scenes to maintain stability within the Church. His approach to leadership is far more institutional than pastoral, making him a favorite among conservative factions who prefer a pope that upholds tradition and the historical structures of the Vatican hierarchy. While Tagle has focused on grassroots movements and social change, Parolin has been working to preserve the Vatican's position as a global power. His deep understanding of church politics makes him a formidable contender for the papacy, and his European background aligns with the long-standing tradition of electing popes from within the Vatican's core leadership. The battle between Cardinal Tagle and Cardinal Parolin is about much more than just individual leadership styles. It reflects two different visions for the Catholic Church in the 21st century. If the Church chooses Tagle, it will likely continue the reforms initiated by Pope Francis. It would be a church that prioritizes the poor, embraces change, and seeks to become more inclusive in an ever-diversifying world. This would signal a shift toward Asia, Africa, and Latin America, regions that are becoming increasingly central to Catholicism's future. If the Church chooses Parolin, it would reaffirm its traditional governing structures and focus on maintaining diplomatic influence and continuity. While this might ensure stability and preserve long-standing traditions, it may also slow down or even halt some of the reforms introduced under Pope Francis. This decision is not just about the next few years, it will define Catholicism for generations. Historically, the majority of popes have been European, with Italians dominating the role for centuries. The election of Pope Francis was a break from this pattern, but if a figure like Parolin ascends to the papacy, it could suggest a return to tradition. This raises another crucial question. Does the Catholic Church need a leader who represents the evolving face of its global followers, or one who ensures continuity and order within its centuries-old institution? This debate is not limited to the Vatican. Around the world, Catholics have their own hopes and concerns about the future of the Church. Progressive Catholics, particularly those in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, may favor Tagle's vision of an inclusive, service-oriented church. They want a pope who reflects their realities and is committed to grassroots movements. Conservative Catholics, especially those in Europe and traditional Vatican circles, may lean toward Parolin, seeing him as a guardian of doctrine and a stabilizing force. They believe the Church should not abandon its hierarchical structure and theological rigor. Regardless of who is chosen, the next pope will face enormous challenges. The Church is navigating a world that is becoming increasingly polarized, with social, political, and moral issues creating deep divisions. How will the next pope address declining faith in the West while embracing the growth of Catholicism in the global South? Will the Church remain an institution of tradition, or will it continue evolving in response to modern realities? What role will the Vatican play in issues like climate change, social justice, and interfaith dialogue? The future of the Catholic Church is at stake, and its next leader will determine whether it continues forward on the path of reform or returns to its historical traditions. The coming years will be defining moments for Catholicism. Will Cardinal Luis Tagle, with his deep connection to the people, lead the Church into a new era? Or will Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's strategic diplomat, steer it back toward tradition? The Catholic Church finds itself at a crossroads where the decision of who will succeed Pope Francis is not merely about selecting a new leader, but about determining the course of the Church for generations to come. With a global congregation that is growing in some regions and shrinking in others, the question of leadership has become more than just an internal matter. It is a defining moment that will shape the future of Catholicism in an increasingly complex and divided world. The rising prominence of Cardinal Luis Tagle and Cardinal Pietro Parolin reflects the ongoing struggle between those who wish to continue the progressive reforms of Pope Francis and those who seek to preserve the traditional structure that has defined the Vatican for centuries. The election of Pope Francis was a historic departure from the European dominance of the papacy. For centuries, the Catholic Church had been led by popes from Europe, particularly Italy, reinforcing the influence of the Vatican's deeply rooted clerical hierarchy. But when Pope Francis, the first Latin American pope, assumed the role in 2013, it signaled a shift toward a more global church, one that recognized the importance of non-Western communities where Catholicism was thriving. His leadership style prioritized humility, direct engagement with the people, and a focus on addressing the concerns of those on the margins of society. He openly spoke about poverty, migration, climate change, and the responsibility of the Church to remain a source of hope for those most in need. However, this shift has not come without controversy, as many within the Vatican and traditionalist circles have resisted these changes, believing that the focus on social justice and reform has taken precedence over theological and doctrinal matters. Cardinal Luis Tagle has emerged as one of the most influential figures in continuing this reformist vision. As a leader from the Philippines, he represents the growing influence of Catholic communities in Asia, where faith remains deeply embedded in everyday life. His rise within the Vatican has been marked by his work in Caritas Internationalis, where he oversaw humanitarian efforts on a global scale, advocating for the poor and displaced. His leadership style is deeply pastoral, emphasizing personal connections with communities and fostering an inclusive church that prioritizes compassion over rigid institutional structures. His alignment with Pope Francis' ideals has led many to believe that he could be the natural successor, someone who would continue the work of decentralizing power within the Church and making it more accessible to ordinary people. On the other hand, Cardinal Pietro Parolin represents the traditional power structure of the Vatican. As the Secretary of State, he has been instrumental in maintaining the Church's global diplomatic relations, ensuring that it retains its influence in political and religious affairs. Unlike Tagle, whose focus has been on grassroots engagement and social justice, Parolin has worked within the Vatican's corridors of power, balancing the interests of various factions and ensuring that the Church's governance remains intact. He is widely respected for his strategic mind, his ability to navigate complex internal politics, and his role as a mediator between conflicting interests within the Church. Many view him as the ideal candidate to maintain stability, reinforcing the hierarchical structure that has defined the Catholic Church for centuries, while adapting carefully to the modern world without making drastic changes. The contrast between Tagle and Parolin is not just about individual leadership styles, but about the broader ideological struggle within the Catholic Church. There are those who believe that the Church must continue evolving, embracing the diversity of its global congregation and addressing contemporary social issues head-on. They see Tagle as the embodiment of this vision, someone who understands the realities of non-Western Catholicism and is willing to push for reforms that make the Church more relevant in people's daily lives. On the other hand, there are those who argue that the Church must maintain its traditional foundations, preserving its theological integrity and ensuring that its leadership remains grounded in centuries-old doctrine. To them, Parolin represents a stabilizing force, a leader who can uphold the Church's diplomatic and structural traditions while ensuring that it does not lose sight of its historical mission. The question of succession is further complicated by the fact that Pope Francis has not explicitly named a preferred candidate, leaving room for speculation and debate. Some believe that the increasing visibility of Tagle in Vatican affairs is a sign that he is being positioned as a frontrunner, while others argue that Parolin's deep entrenchment within the Church's governing body makes him the more likely choice. What is certain is that whoever is chosen will inherit a Church that is facing some of the most significant challenges in its history. The decline of faith in Europe and North America has led to concerns about the future of Catholicism in these regions, where secularism and religious disaffiliation are on the rise. At the same time, Catholicism continues to flourish in places like Africa and Asia, raising questions about whether the next pope should reflect this demographic shift. If the Church continues along the path set by Pope Francis, it may embrace a leader like Tagle, who understands the needs of these emerging Catholic strongholds and is willing to further decentralize power. However, if the Church opts for stability and continuity, it may turn to Parolin, ensuring that governance remains firmly rooted in the traditions of the Vatican. This decision is not just about the next few years, but about the direction of Catholicism for generations. A pope like Tagle could mean a more people-centered Church, one that continues to challenge old structures in favor of inclusivity and social engagement. A pope like Parolin would likely reinforce the existing order, ensuring that the Church remains diplomatically influential while carefully managing the pace of any reforms. The choice between these two figures reflects the broader question of what kind of Church Catholics around the world want to see. In regions where faith remains strong, there is a desire for leadership that feels connected to the people, someone who understands the struggles of everyday believers and is willing to advocate for change. In more traditional circles, there is a fear that too much reform could weaken the Church's theological foundations, leading to a preference for a leader who will uphold doctrine while adapting to modern challenges in a measured way. Regardless of who is ultimately chosen, the next pope will face an immense task. The world is becoming increasingly polarized, and the Catholic Church must navigate this landscape while remaining a source of moral and spiritual guidance. Issues such as climate change, social justice, and interfaith relations will continue to shape the Church's engagement with the world, and its leadership must be prepared to address these challenges head-on. The decision will not only impact the Vatican, but will resonate throughout Catholic communities worldwide, determining whether the Church continues forward on a path of transformation or seeks to reaffirm its historical traditions. The anticipation surrounding the next papal election is growing, and with figures like Tagle and Parolin emerging as leading contenders, the conversation about the Church's future is more relevant than ever. Will Catholicism continue to embrace the progressive ideals that Pope Francis has championed, or will it return to a more centralized, traditional model? The faithful around the world are watching closely, knowing that the decision will define the future of their Church. The question remains, will the next pope be a reformer, a stabilizer, or someone who finds a way to bridge the divide between the two? The answer will shape the destiny of Catholicism in the 21st century and beyond. The anticipation surrounding the future leadership of the Catholic Church continues to intensify as the ideological divide between reformists and traditionalists becomes more pronounced. The selection of the next pope will not only determine the Church's direction for the next several decades, but also influence how Catholicism adapts to the rapidly changing dynamics of faith and society worldwide. The competition between Cardinal Luis Tagle and Cardinal Pietro Parolin is more than just a question of personal leadership styles. It is a defining struggle between two visions for the future of Catholicism, one rooted in progress and pastoral outreach, the other in stability and diplomatic continuity. The challenge facing the Catholic Church today is unlike any other moment in history. The world has become increasingly fragmented, with deep political and ideological divisions shaping societies at every level. The Church, which has always played a role in providing moral guidance, now finds itself at a crossroads where it must decide how to maintain its influence in a world that is rapidly losing interest in institutional religion. This is particularly true in the Western world, where church attendance has declined significantly, vocations have dwindled, and the younger generation has distanced itself from organized faith. Many believe that the next pope must find a way to reconnect with these lost followers while simultaneously nurturing the Church's growing presence in places like Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where Catholicism is thriving. Cardinal Luis Tagle's appeal lies in his ability to reach people on a deeply personal level. He represents a church that is not confined to the walls of the Vatican, but is instead engaged with the everyday struggles of the faithful. He is a firm believer in the idea that the Church should not just preach about compassion, but embody it in its actions. This approach has made him one of the most beloved Catholic figures outside of the Vatican, particularly in developing nations where faith plays an integral role in social structures. His vision of a more inclusive and service-oriented Catholic Church aligns closely with the reforms introduced by Pope Francis, making him an ideal candidate for those who wish to see these changes continue. However, his rise to prominence has not been without resistance. Many within the Vatican hierarchy remain skeptical of a leader who prioritizes humanitarian efforts and dialogue over doctrinal precision and institutional governance. His detractors argue that while his approach is admirable, it could weaken the Church's doctrinal authority and shift its focus too far from its theological roots. On the other side of this debate stands Cardinal Pietro Parolin, a seasoned diplomat and a master of Vatican bureaucracy. He has spent much of his career managing the Church's relationships with governments and international organizations, ensuring that Catholicism remains a powerful force in global affairs. His supporters argue that in an era of geopolitical uncertainty, the Church needs a leader who understands the intricacies of diplomacy and governance. Parolin's expertise in navigating the complexities of international relations has positioned him as the preferred candidate for those who believe the Church must reinforce its traditional structures and maintain stability rather than risk upheaval. Unlike Tagle, who is seen as a reformist, Parolin is viewed as a pragmatic administrator who can bridge the gap between modern challenges and long-standing traditions. While he is not necessarily opposed to progress, he is seen as someone who would implement changes gradually, ensuring that reforms do not disrupt the core identity of the Church. The ideological clash between these two figures encapsulates a much larger struggle within the Catholic Church. The division between progressives and conservatives has been growing, particularly since Pope Francis began implementing reforms that challenged many long-standing traditions. His efforts to decentralize church authority, address issues such as climate change and economic inequality, and emphasize inclusivity have been met with mixed reactions. While many Catholics have embraced these changes, there has been significant pushback from traditionalists who argue that the Church should focus more on preserving its doctrinal teachings rather than engaging in what they see as political and social activism. This debate will play a crucial role in the selection of the next pope, as the cardinals tasked with making this decision must determine whether they want to continue the path set by Pope Francis or restore a more traditionalist approach to leadership. The question of succession also raises important discussions about representation within the Vatican. Historically, the majority of popes have been European, particularly Italian, reflecting the long-standing dominance of Western influence in the Church. Pope Francis' election was a significant departure from this pattern, as he became the first Latin American pope, signaling a shift toward a more global perspective. If Cardinal Tagle were to be elected, it would mark another historic moment, as he would become the first Asian pope, further reinforcing the growing influence of non-Western Catholic communities. However, if Parolin is chosen, it could suggest a return to tradition, where leadership remains firmly rooted in the European hierarchy of the Vatican. Beyond the ideological and geographical factors at play, the next pope will also face pressing practical challenges. One of the most significant issues confronting the Church today is the declining number of clergy members, particularly in the Western world. Seminaries that once produced large numbers of priests are now struggling to attract new candidates, leading to concerns about how the Church will continue to function in the coming decades. This shortage has placed greater pressure on existing clergy, with many dioceses having to consolidate parishes due to a lack of personnel. Addressing this crisis will require a leader who can inspire a new generation to answer the call to religious life, a task that will not be easy in a world where secularism is on the rise. Another major challenge is the financial health of the Church. The Vatican has faced numerous financial controversies in recent years, leading Pope Francis to push for greater transparency and accountability. His efforts to clean up the Vatican's financial institutions have been met with resistance from some within the Church who prefer to keep certain financial dealings out of public scrutiny. If a leader like Tagle were to ascend to the papacy, he would likely continue these transparency initiatives, reinforcing the Church's commitment to ethical financial practices. However, if Parolin were chosen, he might take a more measured approach, balancing financial reform with the need to maintain the Church's institutional stability. The ongoing discussion about interfaith relations will also play a crucial role in the Church's future. As globalization continues to bring different religious communities into closer contact, the Vatican must navigate how to foster positive relationships with other faith traditions. Pope Francis has made significant efforts in this regard, engaging in dialogue with leaders from various religious backgrounds to promote peace and mutual understanding. A pope like Tagle, who has a history of interfaith engagement, could further these efforts by emphasizing cooperation between religious groups. Parolin, with his diplomatic background, would likely approach this issue from a geopolitical standpoint, ensuring that the Vatican's relationships with other religious institutions are strategically managed. Ultimately, the decision of who will succeed Pope Francis will have profound implications for the Catholic Church's future. It is a decision that will not only impact internal church governance, but also shape the way Catholicism interacts with the world. As the conclave of cardinals prepares to make this choice, they will have to weigh the need for continuity against the desire for progress. They will have to consider whether the Church should continue its trajectory of reform and inclusivity or reinforce its historical traditions to preserve stability. The faithful around the world will be watching closely, knowing that this decision will determine the future of their Church for years to come. The outcome of this decision will reflect the collective priorities of the Church's leadership and its global community. Will the Catholic Church choose a path that embraces the changing world, or will it seek to hold firmly to its foundational traditions? Will Cardinal Tagle emerge as the next pope, bringing with him a vision of engagement, inclusivity, and reform? Or will Cardinal Parolin take the helm, ensuring that the Church remains a bastion of stability and continuity? These questions remain unanswered, but one thing is certain. The Catholic Church stands at a pivotal moment in its history, and the choice it makes now will define its legacy in the modern world.